Hi, King Dan here. This video is called Cain and Abel Are United. Alright, one of the traits of a libertarian is to question the presuppositions, which are just the things that you presume to be true as you walked into a given scenario. It's really just a fancy way of saying a presupposition is something you assumed to be true or something you initially accepted as fact that really isn't grounded in reality. True Father's words. Everyone likes to say Cain and Abel united and to present this kind of really positive atmosphere around it, and it ultimately points back to this 2012 June 5th speech and ceremony by Father. And in that speech, at least in written form, Father says, Kukjin and Hyunjin, these two sons have become united as Cain and Abel. No matter what happens, it seems like everyone always likes to point back to this and say, oh, Cain and Abel are united, Hyunjin and Kukjin are united. And honestly, I can't really disagree with that, but the culture and the logic is eerily familiar to the way Family Fed members like to say, true parents are one. And even with that, I agree with that, but it's how they're using that makes a real question for me, because Father could have declared Cain and Abel united and true parents are one as really a victory in a current providential condition, or he could have declared it as like a future providential outcome. Just to say that, though, really shuts off any questioning of the spirit and how the words are used. This became really apparent to me during the Jamal vs. Lourdes case, because this was an idea that was heavily promoted, but just something spiritually didn't quite add up, at least to me. Alright, Satan stands ahead of the older. In the Jamal vs. Lourdes case, it led me to search through Father's words, and when I saw this, it's like the waters parted and really everything made sense. So here's what it says. The younger should stand ahead of the older. If the younger follows the older, they will find that Satan stands ahead of the older. That Satan has already been related to the older, and that Satan, associated with the Cain world, can mobilize it. In the satanic world, they have no concept of putting the wonderful younger people ahead of themselves. But in this heavenly side, even by putting immature younger people ahead of them, they must try to protect the younger by becoming their fences. One way this particular passage blew my mind and really made me think about things is look at the date. It says it's on June 17, 2012. That's less than 2 weeks after Father declared Cain and Abel are united. That's important because he declares Cain and Abel are united, but then he gives this really ominous warning. Sure, you can look at this and think it's a generational kind of issue, so maybe the second generation shouldn't be following the first generation, or something else. But when I saw this, I thought of the two brothers. And then it really made me question whether Hyunjin was following Kukjin or Kukjin was following Hyunjin. Fact or fiction? So these are the things that immediately came to my mind as I was questioning my presuppositions. Jamal vs. Lourdes. In the case, and I'm not going to go into detail here because you can watch my whole series on it, you could actually see Hyunjin going back and forth. It's like he was following his conscience, and then it was like he was following power, or it was like this conflict within Hyunjin. And even if you look in the case itself shows that Kukjin was advising and kind of telling Hyunjin what to do. Go appoint this judge. And it didn't even follow the constitutional process, but it was like it was actually Kukjin that was leading the charge. Entering the palace. This one comes to mind because there's an early King's report where Hyunjin was actually reflecting and saying himself that Kukjin was probably preparing the palace in advance for Hyunjin even before they ever decided to go into that house. So right there, it was like he admitted it himself. Absolute Sex versus Freedom Society. You can watch my video with the same name for more information on that topic. But basically, any reference to absolute sex is more of an afterthought or a lip service expression than really the core priority for Hyunjin. You just pick a Sunday service over the last several years, and you'll see what the predominant theme is. Is it more like Kukjin, or is it more like True Father and Hyunjin's initial inspiration of absolute sex? Definitions, providence, and theology. I made a video labeled Kingship Relativism 101, which really just listed out a lot of the terminology that I've seen change over the last several years. And if I look back at those changes, they all seem to go toward Kukjin's vision versus what I'm reading from Father's words. Chungaguk, judgment, even tribal messiahship. It's Kukjin's vision. And then in terms of providence or providential forecasting, it's always Kukjin's vision that's getting kind of shared on the King's Report or on Sunday service, where even from the beginning, the providence has moved from the east to the west, or the economic outlook has that changes. The focus on Trump using the apparatus now against the deep state, or even just the overall focus on government, which is Kukjin's obsession. So in terms of providence, who's actually leading the forecasting? And then in terms of theology, isn't it Kukjin's theology that evil will always be chosen? I can't back that up with anything I'm reading in Father's words. Father tends to say the opposite. And then in terms of the new theology where we're supposed to attend Hyunjin as the living body of Father, well, that's really convenient, because if it's actually Kukjin with the power trip, if he can get everyone in the world to unite around Hyunjin, and then it's Hyunjin that's uniting around him, then Kukjin, representing the entire Cain world, is actually leading the entire movement. That's an important question, because there's a super focus on a carnal kingdom that still goes back to Kukjin's vision. Emphasis on firearms. So I find that it's really convenient that a relativized version of Rod of Iron seems more like it belongs to Car Arms' kind of publicity hand than actual Father's theology. There is clearly a place for self-defense in Father's culture, but the emphasis on firearms is not Father's core theology. The emphasis itself is the problem. It looks more like Kukjin, or it looks more like Hyunjin following Kukjin's lead, and everyone's just downplaying this like this is a phase Hyunjin is going through. All right, Camp Shahakwa. If you even compare Camp Shahakwa from a few years ago, the atmosphere is totally different. It went from a more absolute sex-oriented family environment toward an individual or a youth training program. The direction just on that one is clearly biased against the family atmosphere. It's not to say that families were barred from going or didn't go, and it's not to say that training is wrong. But is this more in line with Kukjin's vision for a militia system, or Father's theology of saying, marry your enemy? All right, so divine principle graphics. It's Kukjin that's leading the charge to alter the four-position foundation to be 3 vertical circles with an object partner rotating around it. Sure, there could be validity in that, but I don't think people are questioning whether or not it's Kukjin leading the charge to change that. Actually, just saying that made me realize a lot of people shared in the early Zoom calls at like the international meetings that they had. It's mostly Kukjin leading those discussions. Even I'm thinking every time I've gone to Pennsylvania and with those roundtable discussions after church service, it's Kukjin leading the conversation and then Hyunjin kind of chiming in with the side points. Either way, it's Kukjin driving this. Now, that may not be the case anymore, but who started the ball rolling? Whose push was it? Crown of sovereignty. For this one, I have two ideas that I really kind of reflected on and noticed. For me, I see a big difference between the crown placed on Hyunjin by father and the crown placed on Hyunjin by Kukjin. When I read father's speeches around kind of the inaugurations, I don't get a political sense whatsoever. When I read and see everything related to the expression of Kukjin's vision, it's entirely political. And then I see the culture, freedom society, government culture, militia system, focus on government, that's more in line with Kukjin's vision than true father's. To be clear, that doesn't mean father didn't have a political vision, but it's like when once Kukjin put that crown on Hyunjin's head, it was Kukjin's vision that really took the primary focus. So for the second point, I'm going to flip this. So far, I've gave examples where it looks like Hyunjin is following Kukjin. In this case, I'm going to point to an early example where it looks like Kukjin isn't following Hyunjin. Early on, before wearing a crown was normalized or relativized, whichever one you want to call it, Hyunjin was saying you have to wear the crown to the blessing because it would be a deep, deep sign of disrespect. And he made a video that most people think was directed toward Jamal Johnson, like really just laying it into him. But if you notice that blessing in every blessing or every ceremony subsequent to that, Kukjin has never worn a crown. Apparently, everyone needs to respect Hyunjin's wishes, desires, demands, and orders, except for Kukjin. And a lot of people are going to point to all these things that Kukjin does for Hyunjin, but then my question for each one, is this in Kukjin's mind a good investment to keep this going, or is it genuine care, concern, and conscientious true Hainun culture? I don't have all the answers, but I'm really happy that the brothers are united. I just hope, I wish, and I pray that Hyunjin is united with his conscience and not his older brother. Points to ponder. Many of these are actual questions that I have. I may have some idea, but ultimately it might just be that it's only Hyunjin and Kukjin that know. Whose idea was it to start World Peace and Unification Sanctuary Incorporated? Was Hyunjin Moon pushed into breaking the silence? Who actually wrote the proposed constitution for Cheongaguk? Whose idea was it to broadcast the King's Report? Whose idea was it to culturally prioritize the right to bear arms? Whose idea was it to culturally prioritize freedom society over absolute sex? Whose idea was it to make True Father's successor an archangelic pastor? If Hyunjin Moon is following Kukjin Moon, does that mean you are following Satan? Would Hyunjin Moon's sociopath criteria be applicable to the brothers? I want to end this by saying it's really important to say that their unity, that being Hyunjin and Kukjin, their unity against the heresy of the Han Mother is not validation or a justification for any disunity they may have with Father's words. Remember, it's Father's words that sets the standard that we all must follow. So I want to encourage you, go back to the Word and always follow your own conscience. Because, let's be honest, either way, Cain and Abel are definitely united. And, as Kukjin puts it, you don't want to be a good Nazi.